Women pretty much reinvented themselves, starting in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Rosie the Riveter was in the 40s, and she was pretty influential, and she pretty much disproved a lot of the stereotypes about women. Women aren't strong, women aren't tough, women can't do mechanical things. Well, that was proven wrong. We have the opportunity for men to reinvent themselves now.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Jack Kammer didn't start his radio show to share hot takes. He started it to question the story we've been told. And that was back in 1983, and he's still at it today. Jack is a writer, speaker, and longtime advocate for men's voices in conversations about gender and fairness. As a former social worker and parole officer, he's seen up close what happens when people feel unheard. We talk about why so many men feel left out of emotional spaces, what happens when dads aren't around, and how Jack's idea of vitamin M, his take on masculinity, can shift how we think about strength and care. Jack isn't here to stir the pot, he's here to start real conversations. So if you're up for thinking a little differently, this one's worth a listen. Jack Kammer, thank you so much for being here on this Joyful Rebellion today.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
It's going to be a fun conversation because we're talking about something I've never talked about before on the show. And it's interesting because I hear the flip side of what we're about to talk about quite often, even from my really good friends, even from my significant other. She talks about the patriarchy a lot. And we're going to sort of flip that around a little bit because you have a company, it's called Male Friendly Media, and you came to an understanding about men's issues through years of working as a social worker. Is that correct?
I became a social worker late in my life. But I became a social worker. I went back to school very much as part of a continuum of being interested in the social issues of men and boys. My real involvement in these issues began in 1983 when I started a radio show at a station north of Baltimore. It started out as The Lives of Men, and then it became In a Man's Shoes. And we talked every week about what was really going on with men. We would talk about the patriarchy, but only insofar as we wanted to try to disprove this idea that there was some huge cabal of men who run the world, and men have all the power, and any man who is a man has automatic membership in this powerful cabal of the patriarchy, and it's just a wonderful advantage and nothing but privilege to be a man, and that men enjoy oppressing women, that kind of thing. I understand the idea of the patriarchy, and there are such things as patriarchal values. I am not really an anti-feminist as much as I am a counter-feminist. And so I say, okay, I get it. Yeah, there's this thing called a patriarchy, but there's also a female power structure that we also need to talk about. And that is where things get interesting, because the talk about the patriarchy pretty much wants us to believe that all power on all matters in human life are controlled by men. It's a patriarchy. And I think, it doesn't take a whole lot of thinking to realize that it's not quite true to say women are powerless. And that's what we talk about. That's what is behind the idea of men's rebellion. Although a rebellion might be too strong of a word for what we have in mind, we do advocate for some changes that would benefit men.
So much less of a rebellion, maybe a little more of a come to understanding.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice way to put it. I mean, I was just thinking a few minutes ago about the fact that rebellion is probably a bit stronger of a word than we would choose, those of us who are in the branch of the men's movement that I feel comfortable in. We wouldn't really talk about a rebellion. So I thought about, well, there was the American Revolution and there was the French Revolution. And the American Revolution was a fight, a bitter, bitter period of hostilities where a lot of people got killed, mostly male soldiers, by the way. But we now have a very strong alliance with the country that we fought against. The American Revolution was against Britain, and Britain is now probably our best friend in the world. On the other hand, there was the French Revolution. And those people had some complaints too, but they turned theirs into a bloodbath where everybody who had treated them badly got guillotined. So I would like to hasten to let people know, especially people of the female persuasion, that we're talking about a male rebellion or a male revolution. We're more interested in the kind of thing that we achieved with Britain than the French were able to pull off with their revolution. We are looking forward to making things better and forming a stronger alliance than ever. But right now, there are some problems we need to work out.
Back in '83, when you started down this path, what was it that you looked around and you said, there's just some things we need to figure out here? Because either there was misinformation or there was this undercurrent of something that made you say, we need to talk about this. Let's get the discussion going. What was it?
In 1982, I was on a co-ed softball team, and it was a big part of my social life. A lot of nice people, men and women, co-ed, on the softball team. We had a lot of fun. We played every Tuesday nights. We sort of took it seriously, not seriously, but we wanted to be good. And so we even practiced on Friday nights just to have an excuse to get together. 2 weeks in a row after the Tuesday evening games, we were at our team bar, having drinks, dancing, talking, having maybe a little dinner. 2 weeks in a row, two different female teammates were talking to me as we sat at our table eating. They were talking to me about their boyfriends. And they both were telling me tales of woe. I don't even remember what the tales of woe were, because this was 1982. But I do remember that they both ended their tales of woe about their boyfriends, both of them, by saying, and so he's a real jerk, don't you think? Talking about their boyfriends. And so he's a real jerk, don't you think? And all I could do both times, was to say, maybe he's a jerk based on what you're telling me. But on the other hand, from a male perspective, I can tell you that maybe what it looks like to him is such and such. And again, I don't remember the details. But it was something perfectly obvious to me as a man that, well, maybe he's thinking of it like this. Maybe this is what it looks like to him. Maybe this is what his concerns are. And both times, after I said the male perspective on this tale of woe, both times, both women said, oh my God, I never thought of that. So that, to me, was evidence that we had a problem. There was a very ready proclivity on the part of these women to throw their boyfriends under the bus. He's a real jerk. They were very close to just getting rid of him on the idea that he was a real jerk because of this incident or situation they were in. I just knew that that was a problem for male-female relationships, probably culture-wide, because I had experienced it too. Women good, men bad, right? Lots of ways in which men are regarded as inferior to women, which is where we can start talking about this alternative power structure, the alternative to the patriarchy. There is a power structure that writes certain rules that tend to cast men in a negative light. Men are inferior to women in certain very important ways, according to this alternate way of thinking. Women are more kind and caring and gentle and patient and loving and understanding and empathetic. And that's why we should be entrusted with all things having to do with relationships. Women might not say, but it's very much embedded in the female culture and the way girls and women are raised. Boys are raised to think they're better than girls, and at least we used to be raised to think we were better than girls in math and science, and we were more logical, and they cried too much. But, even still today, we have women believing maybe more than ever, actually, that they are inherently superior to men in very important ways, not having to do with government or the economy or making money, but just in being human beings, being nice people, kind, caring, and gentle. And so whenever there is a problem, a relationship problem between a man and a woman, well, we know whose fault it is, right? And that's got to stop. It's really got to stop. It's like enough already. And it's not just inconvenient and unhappy for men. It's really corrosive of our society, especially if you consider the predicaments, the lots of the men at the very bottom of what we might want to call the patriarchy. Yeah, there are advantages to being a Fortune 500 CEO. I don't doubt that. So everybody wants to talk about the Fortune 500. And look at how many men are the CEOs of the Fortune 500. Well, that's fine. I get that. But let's look at the other end of the hierarchy. If we think of the hierarchy as a pyramid, it's kind of narrow at the top. Not a lot of room for a lot of people at the top. It's much wider at the bottom. We want to talk about the Fortune 500. We don't want to talk about the misfortune 5 million. And so if you were given a choice at birth and told, okay, we got 2 deals for you. You get to choose how much risk you want to accept in your life. Option A is you get a chance at being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. At the same time, you have a much, much, much bigger chance of being a serf at the bottom of the male hierarchy, and you might be a ditch digger. That's option A. Option 1, so that we don't have one being better than the other, option A and option 1. Option 1 is, well, you don't have much chance of being a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but you're going to have a safety net, and you have hardly any chance of being a ditch digger. You have a safety net that will care about you, that will empathize with you, that will provide social services to you if you need them, without anybody making you feel ashamed for needing them. You'll have primary relationships with your kids. And you talk about a few other things that are advantages of being female. Which do you want to choose? Well, some people are going to choose option A, and some people are going to choose option 1. That, to me, talks to the fact that there are advantages to being female, just as there are disadvantages to being female. And there are advantages to being male, but there are disadvantages to being male. We can't live happily in a society where one sex gets to choose what mixture of A and 1 they want. And that's pretty much what the women's movement has been about. I want to continue being a mother. I want to continue having primary relationships with my kids, but I also want to have full opportunity to be a CEO. And if that doesn't work out, well, then I want the opportunity to go back and be a mother. More options for women than there are options for men, at least practical, reasonably available options for men and women. So there are many explanations for why women make less money than men. The primary ones that have been documented by legitimate social scientists, not feminist ideologues. It's not the patriarchy and it's not male chauvinism. It's that women spend less time in their careers, their money-making careers, than men do. Men are willing to commute further. They're willing to work longer hours, that kind of thing. They're willing to study things at college that don't really interest them, but that make more money. But even with all of that taken into consideration, there is, according to many economic analyses, some unknown piece that we really can't account for. Something between like 7% and 3% of the gap between men and women is unexplained. I think the explanation for what other people consider unexplained is the idea of options. And if we know anything about the stock market, an option is something that you can buy. It has a value, whether you use it or not. For instance, you might buy an option to buy gold at some low price. If the price goes lower than that low price, you're not going to exercise your option. You'll just buy it on the market. So options have value whether you use them or not. The fact that women have more options than men in their lives, I think, is a reflection of the fact that options have a cost. You don't get them for free. If you want an option, you have to buy it. You have to pay for it. And I think that that is one of the things that is an advantage of female culture of being a woman. I remember as a kid hearing frequently that it's a woman's prerogative to change her mind. You didn't hear that said about men. A man would go to work at some company and stay there for 40 years. Why? Because he's under a lot of pressure. He's the provider. He's got to make the money. The kids and the wife are counting on him and all that stuff. So I guess that's just a quick thumbnail sketch of the idea that there are advantages to the traditional roles of both men and women. I could talk to you a little bit if you would like, because I know I've been doing most of the talking here, and I'm happy to shut up and let you ask a question or say something if you like. But we have this idea of the hierarchy on the male side. It's a pyramid. You might also think of it as a skyscraper. It's very tall and it's very obvious, and you can see it from 20 miles away. And that's what we see, that's what we look at, and that's why we say the world is run by a patriarchy and men have all the power. Well, if there is, as I maintain, a female power structure, where is it? Why don't we see it? And the reason I offer is that while the male power structure is a hierarchy, very broad at the bottom, narrow at the top, with a dollar sign at the top, the female power structure is very different. It's not very tall, but it's very wide. It's not like a skyscraper. It's more like a convention center with floor space on maybe just 1 or 2 or maybe 3 stories tall. Doesn't really have a top with a dollar sign on it. It's got like 14 acres of floor space. And it doesn't have really a top at all. It has a center. And at the center of the female power structure, it's not a dollar sign. It's a big red heart. And just as the dollar sign symbolizes traditional male power, government, business, finance, it could even represent military power if you wanted to stretch it a little bit. The female power structure has a heart at the center, which represents what we recognize as some of the best things in life that are free. Caring, connection, emotions, expressiveness, having people give a darn about you, having not every transaction be transactional, but you give because you want to give. It's about love. You receive love. That's more like what happens in the convention center, where people are all peers, all equals, and they're walking around and making deals and networking and making friends and trying new ideas. Very much different from what happens in the skyscraper, where it can be very much not cooperative. It can be competitive, especially if you're working with somebody who also has his or her eye on the next promotion in your company. It's just a whole different feeling. There are advantages to it, lots of disadvantages to it. And we need to be more familiar and comfortable in talking about the female power structure and the essential value of the big red heart. And if you look at the problems that a lot of men face, they're connected to the fact that they're not connected to the big red heart nearly as well as women are. And that's basically what it's about for me. Men need and deserve human connection. We're social creatures. And the idea that men don't care about emotions and relationships, I can't think of anything that's more incorrect. We might be raised not to care about them. We might be raised not to pay a lot of attention to them. We might be raised to sort of think, oh, well, dog eat dog. I hate to have to stab my buddy in the back, but I want the promotion and my family wants me to have the promotion, so I can't care about the fact that he didn't get the promotion and I did. It's just life, right? Life's a bitch and then you die. Is there any doubt that it was a man who made up that saying rather than a woman? Life's a bitch and then you die. I mean, that's just sort of the tenor of male life for a lot of men. Maybe not for the Fortune 500 CEO guys, although it's worth pointing out, a lot of them are not really very happy. A lot of pressure in their lives. So it's time to talk about the disadvantages of being male and the advantages of being female, just so that we can be honest, have a negotiation, figure out how we can maximize happiness for both sexes. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's about synergy. If we're both happy and energized and loving each other and trusting each other, all kinds of good synergies can occur. A lot of creativity can happen. Trust and love can grow. And it just becomes better for everybody. And instead of worrying about how big of a slice of a pie does each sex get, you don't have to think about that one stinking little pie. You say, hey, why don't we build a bakery and make all the pies we want? Just that mindset, just that mind shift. But if the mindset that we have is that men have all the power and it's not fair, and we're going to take it from them, and we're going to deny that we have any power at all, it drives men crazy.
When you started this conversation in 1983, what was the feedback you got? Because it was a very different time from what we have now in America, at least. And I remember a little from those days, and it was still pretty traditional gender roles from what I remember. And when you started this conversation, was there pushback? What was it like?
Well, the show actually became the most popular public affairs show on this station. Now, I have to hasten to add that it was a very crazy college-run station. But it's still a great station. It got some traction. I mean, it started out as a half an hour pre-recorded, but it became clear that people were listening. And so we expanded it to an hour live with phone calls. And we were getting phone calls. We were getting reaction. I don't remember a whole lot of bad reaction from men, although I do remember one guy used to call me so much that I said, all right, look, you want to come in and do a show and you'll be the only guest and we'll sort of have a debate. And he took me up on that. And as I recall, the debate started and ended with me asking this question. Tell me, do women ever do anything wrong? And he sputtered, and he couldn't. That was pretty much the end of it.
He couldn't let himself say no. That's funny. So back then when this came out and it was on college radio, what were the men calling in about? What did they feel was important for them to be able to say out loud?
The radio show is pretty much a precursor to a podcast, right? I mean, what we're doing here is essentially a radio show that's going to be in a can and available for anybody to download at any time. So you have a guest, and the guest is bringing to you a particular topic and says, would you like to talk about this on your show? So what the men would be calling about, and what women would be calling about too, typically was about the topic that the guest brought or that I asked the guest to bring to the show. Now, occasionally I did do open shows. I mean, that's also a little bit of a testament to how much interest there was. I would just open the phones and hope that people called, and they did. So on those open shows, what did people call about? A lot of it, you'll not be surprised to know, had to do with divorced fathers really, really, really being unhappy. That is typically the way that most men will start to see the falsehood of the idea that it's a man's world and men have all the power. Because when you are dismissed from your children's lives and the mother can treat you any way she wants, even if there's a court order that says you will get to see the kids a certain number of hours per week and have overnights with them on every other weekend, if she doesn't want you to have it, you aren't getting it. And nobody's going to do anything about it. At least that's the way it was back in the 80s. Maybe it's getting a little better. I keep hearing how it's getting a little better. But the men who are involved in divorces these days still have terrible stories about how badly they're treated. So divorce, fatherhood was very much a topic. And, you know, there were other things like suicide on the open shows, just general unhappiness with feminism and how feminism was sort of running roughshod over the entire discussion of what gender equality needed to look like. There was very little discussion in the early days of feminism about asking men, well, what would you like as we proceed towards eliminating sexism? There's never any discussion about that. So my radio show was a small opportunity for men to say what sexism looked like to them, how they experienced it, and what they would like to see done about it.
I'm always interested in the different gender roles for every guest that I have on. So even if it's not related to gender specifically, I'll give you an example. I had a financial planner on. This was last year, and she primarily works with women who have been, maybe they've been divorced, maybe their husband did all the finances and now they've got to figure things out. And she works with them to get them organized, get them on a track. And I asked them, tell me about your clients where they are married and you're working with them. How do the men view the finances differently than the women? And what she said was pretty profound to me. She said that the men see their financial health, whatever their investments they're doing, their retirement, whatever they save for their kids' college, maybe, they see it like they would watch the game and they want to know what's the score. Are we up? Are we down? What's our team doing? She says it's very much like that when she's talking to the man. And then she has to switch gears because the woman is asking her very different questions about the same things. She's looking at it saying, what can we do with this? What will this allow us to do? What will this college savings account do for my kids? They're not asking about the score. They're not asking if we're up or we're down. They're asking about what it's going to do for them. Whereas the man is asking, what's the performance of these things right now? And it got me thinking about the big difference, and it's a natural difference between male masculine energy and feminine energy, and the things that are running through our minds as males and our counterparts' minds at any given time. We could be looking at the very same thing. And it's like you said with your example at the pub that night, we're having very different perspectives on it, wildly different thoughts about it. We're looking at the same thing. And so that can create that tension that we experience sometimes in communication. And you started your radio show in the 80s, then fast forward several years, maybe a decade. I forgot when I read this book, but it was Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. You remember that? And it was trying to be the Rosetta Stone, so to speak, try to decode the difference in communications, the difference of what men care about versus what women care about and how we can come together. And it seemed like that got wildly popular. What's your thoughts on what was starting to happen maybe in the 90s when, you got Oprah, you've got a lot of these movements who are either sort of consumer feminism, but also trying to bridge the gap and help just everybody get along?
I never read that book. I have heard sort of a satirical counterpart to that book.
Okay.
That sometimes resonates with me, although the title as it was written also resonates with me. The satirical one was, Men Are From Earth, Women Are From Earth, let's get over it.
Yeah.
And I think both titles point to very valid things. We're both from Earth, so we have a lot of overlap in who we are, how we are. We're both human beings, and there really are very few things that only men can do and very few things that only women can do. There's a lot of overlap in how we want to live our lives. On the other hand, there are some differences, and they show up in variations of gray as you move towards the extremes. I think that largely men did not participate in the whole discussion that John Gray wanted to try to address because men were told to focus on making money, and there was no doubt in our materialistic culture that there was value in making money. Women, on the other hand, were primarily focused on relationships, and in our materialistic culture, it's easy to dismiss the value of relationships. So women were more able to sort of talk about not pursuing their role. They were more capable, more able. It was more credible for them to say, we are demeaned because you guys are getting paid dollars when we are not getting paid except in love and affection. Their value was easily demeaned, easy to dismiss. And so because men were in this position of privilege, it was very difficult for us to have conversations in which we could say, well, we really aren't completely privileged, and there really are things we want. It was much more possible for women to sort of demand attention for the things they didn't have, much less easy for men to demand attention for the things they didn't have. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I'm curious if this is a modern issue or if this is something 200 years ago when everyone was just fighting to survive and keep their family secure, and everyone had a job. Now we've got so many luxuries. It feels like we've got luxuries not only to avoid doing certain things ourselves, but we have the luxuries to complain about things that may not be perfect, and not fully understanding or grasping that nothing's ever perfect. And it seems like people, both men and women, are a little more vocal about it now. But a couple of 100 years ago, they were just trying to survive, and it was all hands on deck.
Yep.
Do you have any historical anecdotes?
What immediately comes to mind is the old adage that the idle hands are the devil's workshop. And maybe in our modern society, we should say an idle mind is the devil's workshop. 200 years ago, people had to spend a whole lot of their energy, day and night, thinking about just sheer survival, right? Just getting food on the table, getting the crops in. Now we've got these supposed luxuries that are supposed to make us happy that aren't really. And when you feel like you've been gypped, you got to find somebody who's gypped you. You got to get even. You got to get your money back somehow, one way or the other. You have to stand up for yourself. So I think that we have a lot of time on our hands to think about several unhappy things. Why do I feel so bereft? Why do I feel like life isn't worth living? Why am I disappointed in the fact that I bought something that the people on TV said was going to make me happy because they were all smiling on TV, and I bought it, and it was fun for 2 days, but so I think we're just sort of, our souls are very hungry and very unsettled and very unhappy, and we have the time, because we're not just at survival level anymore, to be mad about that, I think. 200 years ago, very much to the point of what we're talking about here, men and women were partners, working together side by side, especially when we were an agrarian economy. The husband was always there on the farm. The mother was always there on the farm. And they were working together, trusting each other, seeing each other's struggles, appreciating what each other was doing, not having some crazy idea that men are having 2 martini lunches and that's not fair, and men thinking that all women are doing is watching soap operas, and that's not fair. We were more together. I think that the Industrial Revolution pretty much had a bad effect on that, sending men off to factories where they were away from their loved ones. It was a form of specialization that really hurt us. Men will go to the factories, they'll go into the cities, go into these factories where they were not exactly having a ball, and the mother stays home all by herself with the kids, and she's got the responsibility for running that house all by herself. And so she wasn't necessarily having a ball either. So if specialization is at the root of our unhappiness, where you got to do this and you got to do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that, if too much of a good thing has become a bad thing for lots of us, it's time to think about how do we share our specializations. Back when we were a little band of humans walking across the grasslands of the Serengeti, we were very much in danger of dying instantly if a saber-toothed tiger jumped out from behind a rock or something and could eat you and your wife and your kids. You'd be gone. Well, to counteract that, to the degree that humans could, they specialized. The woman's got the breasts, the woman's got the womb. We'll put her in charge of the kids. The man's got some bigger muscles. We'll give him the spear and put him in charge of walking around the periphery to keep the saber-toothed tigers away. That was very understandable, severe specialization, where life was very tenuous and we had to marshal every bit of efficiency we could toward staying alive. And specialization was part of that. So we proceed through history with the development of civilization. We get to the point where we're at an agrarian economy. We're still somewhat specialized because it's the man who's going out into the field, the woman staying in the farmhouse, but it's becoming less specialized because they're working together much more cooperatively. What we have now is the ability, and we've demonstrated the ability, for women not to be specialized out of the male domain. We need to proceed with the development in human evolution to have men not be specialized out of the women's domain. And so to me, it really gets into the idea of reinvention. Women pretty much reinvented themselves starting in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Rosie the Riveter was in the 40s, and she was pretty influential in getting women to reinvent themselves. She pretty much disproved a lot of the stereotypes about women. Women aren't strong, women aren't tough, women can't do mechanical things. Well, that was proven wrong. We have the opportunity for men to reinvent themselves now. Women became lawyers, women became doctors, women became scientists, women became governors, senators, and one day soon we'll probably have a woman president. That was a reinvention of the female role. The male role also has an opportunity for reinvention here. And I want to talk about the idea of reinvention in a broader way. When IBM first started as a company, it made computers. It was into hardware. It made, I think it was actually called Big Iron. That was its nickname. But then as more and more companies got involved in making computers, IBM had more and more competition. The price for computers went down. They found themselves in a tough spot. What are we going to do? They reinvented themselves. IBM, which used to be about hardware, is now a software services company, and it's doing great. But that was a big reinvention. I think men are at a point where we can reinvent ourselves. And what I mean by that is that we have seen that women can make money and be really good at it, that women have the ability to hold down big jobs. And so we sort of would be smart to look for other opportunities for ourselves, like IBM did. What else can men do besides what we've been doing for the past 100 years, making money in jobs that we may or may not like? Well, I believe that we reinvent ourselves. This is the joyful rebellion. We reinvent ourselves by looking at the female domain and seeing what's the economy there, what's the product there, what's the business activity there, and can we contribute to that? Can we get involved in that? Can we maybe even improve that? And I believe that there are many, many, many men who are sort of the counterpart of the many, many women who back in the late 1800s said, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, who wanted something more than the traditional female domain in the late 1800s. Those women were sort of looked at askance. You want to be a lawyer? Wait a second. What about your natural instincts to be a mother and to love and nurture and be sweet and gentle? You want to be a lawyer and argue all day? And then, the eyebrows would go up at this. Is there something wrong with you? Why would you want to do that? Similarly, there are many men who sort of want to break the script and say, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a scientist. I don't want to be a CEO. I want to be a parent. I want to be a father. I believe that I have the ability, even though the stereotypes about all men are counter to this, but I believe that I have the ability to be a really good parent. I would love to raise kids. I would love to give them the values that I think are important. I want to help them grow up to be healthy adults. Men who would like to do that are very valuable to women who don't want to do that. Because if a woman wants to be a CEO or a doctor or a lawyer or a big researcher, she knows she's going to have to spend a lot of time to get there. But she's okay because it really fulfills her. But what worries her is that she also loves her kids and she likes being a mother, and she can't really focus on her job if she's always worrying about what's going on at the daycare center. And so I think we as men can sort of reinvent ourselves in a way that can be appreciated. And the appreciation of the role of being a parent, I think, has to be elevated, because typically thought of as just sort of pink and frilly. And we know that women's work is demeaned because it doesn't get paid. But the saying that if women ran the world, there wouldn't be any wars.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Okay, well, I would say, I would take that bet. I would really love to run that experiment, even just a thought experiment. Maybe give it to some computer to run the models to see what would happen. I don't know. We'll never be able to do this experiment. But the way I think it is, if women ran the world, even if there were no more wars, which I think is fantasy, there would be something equally good happening if we gave men responsibility for raising kids. I think that if we gave men responsibility for raising kids, we would see, first of all, a very different style of child rearing. And I think we could argue, I would argue, that much of the difficulty young people are having today has to do with the lack of male influence and the depreciation of male values. It's almost like our kids today and their mental health problems are connected to, maybe directly caused by, a vitamin M deficiency. M for maleness, M for masculinity. You mentioned your financial advisor guest on your show. I have a similar story of a dinner I had with a psychiatrist friend of mine. And I asked him a similar question to what you asked the financial advisor. What do you see as the big difference between men and women in your practice as a psychiatrist? Do you see any big differences? He immediately said, yes, absolutely. I said, well, what do you see as the essential difference? And he said, women focus on what people need, men focus on what people deserve. And if that's true, and we have women primarily involved in raising kids and focusing on what they need, they're sort of being infantilized because babies are nothing but need. You can't say to a baby, no, you don't get your bottle because you haven't earned it.
Yeah.
Right? But as kids grow up, there has to be a transition to focusing on what they need to what they deserve and giving them incentives to develop into adults, healthy adults who are interested in turn raising the next generation. I think there is an imbalance of the male value of focusing on what people deserve. Now, I'm not saying there is no value in focusing on what people need. There is value in focusing on what people need. But I think we have an imbalance now. And incorporating more of the focus on deserving and earning and merit that men might provide to their kids could be a very beneficial thing. And I think we'd see perhaps a lot less mental health issues among our kids.
I want to get into this because I've gotten into it with other guests. It's sort of a compounding problem. On one hand, you're saying that a lot of the issues that are happening in modern times in the last 20, 30 years has been because there's a lack of that male energy in their own kids' lives, whether they're at work all the time, whether they don't have access as much to their kids. And I've read several books on this, but it also leads to, I won't say a feminization of men as they're growing up because they're spending the majority of their time with their female teachers at school, their moms at home, and they don't have those role models. Now, I read a book that was pretty impactful. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And it talks about from the Industrial Revolution on to modern times, little boys have progressively spent more and more time raised by women. Whereas before in the agrarian economy, a little boy would go to work with his dad and he'd be around other guys all day, learn how to pee on a tree or whatever kind of stuff you learn from your dad, right? But if you're hanging out with your mom all day or your grandmother, and then you're going to school and kindergarten teacher's a woman, and then you see dad a little bit, in passing, you just don't learn how to pee on a tree doing that, right? You're not going to learn that stuff. You might figure it out on your own at some point, but you're never going to have a role model for it unless you spend a lot of time with a grandfather. I spent a ton of time with my grandfather after he retired from his job. We did woodworking, we did some gardening, we did stuff that men who have retired do. We didn't go out and shoot things. No, we didn't go fishing. But that's what a boy would learn from a father, all that dude stuff. And it seems like we're losing that. I know my son, I haven't done a lot of that stuff with him because I didn't do a lot of that stuff in my own childhood. Stuff that used to make a quote, for everyone listening, I'm putting my fingers in air quotes, stuff that makes a man, right? It's like we've lost a lot of that.
Well, my thoughts immediately go to the misfortune 5 million. There is a huge problem in the lowest socioeconomic strata of our society of fatherlessness. There are lots of women who often be heard to say in discussions with people like me, well, I'm the mother, asserting superiority of motherhood over any value that fatherhood might have. So you have a really bad problem of lack of vitamin M in large swaths of our society. Boys still grow up hearing that they need to be tough. They hear that from every direction. And it's not just from other boys and men that they hear it. They hear it from women too. So what does being tough mean? Ideally, it should mean you stand up for yourself and you make sure you are a respectable person and that people respect you. And if they don't, you address that in one way or another, either by leaving their friendship or by addressing it verbally in some way. But without a clear idea of what it means to be a respected man, and with plenty of ideas of what it is to be a wuss or a wimp or a loser or a chump, and you really don't want to be any of those things, you're going to be really on high alert at all times to not let anybody disrespect you. And if anybody disrespects you even a little teeny tiny bit, well, maybe you go get your gun. I think it's a lack of vitamin M. A deficiency of vitamin M is very much a problem in our most troubled communities. And we talk a lot about responsible fatherhood programs. I used to work for National Fatherhood Initiative. I did that for a year. I was involved in the responsible fatherhood industry for a year. And I loved NFI, National Fatherhood Initiative, because of all of the organizations involved in the responsible fatherhood industry. I think they were the best. But we talk about responsible fatherhood as if the default is irresponsible fatherhood. And the idea that if a father isn't around, well, we know how men are. He must be no good. He's a bum. When in fact, many men are not around because they've been kicked to the curb. Because if you don't have any money, who the hell needs you, right? We also need, as part of our joyful rebellion, some responsible motherhood programs. Because there are irresponsible mothers who do not at all value fatherhood or what men can contribute to their kids. It's very egotistical, very chauvinistic, very detrimental. And it needs to be addressed head on. And it's not going to be easy because the people to whom we will be addressing this are not likely to say, yeah, you're right. They're going to fight. Because many of the women who most need responsible motherhood programs think they are doing motherhood just fine. And it's their only job. It's their only job. And they are not interested in sharing it with some man any more than the accountant was interested in sharing his job with a woman. This is my job. I do. This is what puts food on my wife's and kids' table. This makes me who I am. I don't want to share this. This is my identity. It's not going to be easy, but we really do need to talk about responsible fatherhood. We need to come to the aid of the men who are really, really, really at the bottom of the barrel, who are demeaned and disrespected in numerous ways, and who really cannot catch a break. And I saw lots of those fellas in my office when I was a parole and probation agent in central Baltimore. It ain't easy being a poor man, a man with a bad education, a man with very few skills, in a neighborhood with very few jobs, with an arrest record and jail time on your resume. Now, how did these guys get to be in trouble in the first place? Well, I would maintain that a lot of it is because they didn't really have any loving relationships to begin with, or I shouldn't say, they didn't have loving relationships that were strong enough to see them through the rough times of not being able to make money. And so they figured out ways to make money by any means necessary, and that often ended them up in jail with an arrest record, making them even more disposable than they were before they went to jail. You can see where my head goes and why I believe that there are serious social problems involved in what's going on between men and women. And although there was a lot of value in talking about nice relationships and can't we all get along and have intimacy and be vulnerable with each other, that's all great. But that's just the tiny piece of the dysfunction that is happening at the lowest, most distressed levels of our society. And reinventing fatherhood could have huge benefits for the folks who are stuck there. Because in my experience, the men in my parole and probation office really, really, really wanted to do the right thing. They had a lot of heart, even though they didn't have a lot of money. And they just did not want to be wallets. And that's how our society treats them. You know, we're going to make you pay child support, even though the mother isn't really letting you see your kids. And if that happens, the state isn't really interested in enforcing her obligation to maintain a relationship between the father and the kids. And in some states, it's worth pointing out, if the father isn't married to the mother, he's got no rights. Interesting that the mother isn't married to the father either, but she gets all the rights. We really got to do better here. We really got to recognize the sexism that's involved in our thinking about men, what we think men's proper role is. We really need to rethink the value of men. Instead of writing and reading books called The End of Men and Are Men Even Necessary, which are really real books that people are really, really believing after they read.
Do you feel like that's a big reaction? Because women, historically in America, they've spent the last, 100-ish years fighting for basic equality, things like the right to vote. That's something they had to fight for. And I think it was in my lifetime up until 1976 before a woman could open up her own credit card account. It wasn't until I think Reagan got into office where a woman could ask for a divorce without some huge factor being in play. So there have definitely been some inequalities between the two sexes that were kind of written into the law in the very beginning. Now we've come more into modern times and we've got the residuals of some of those things. And each generation is getting a little bit more progressive in their thinking that, everybody's equal. Everybody's doing the same thing. And we've talked about perspective up until now, but those things were real. Women couldn't do a lot of the things men could do for many, many, many decades. And now a lot of that, at least under the law, is gone. But it sounds like what you're saying is there may have been just a reaction to a lot of that history and needing to take it a little farther and, okay, let's put men in their place now.
Well, that would be bad enough if that were the case. Revenge, retribution, we don't want those as motivations for the zeitgeist, for the tone of our society and the tone of how women treat men. That would be terrible. So let's hope it's not about revenge and vengeance. I think that part of the problem is that there are women who are trying to keep men out of women's traditional sphere, just as men tried to keep women out of men's traditional sphere. And these books are an example, but I think the myriad stereotypes about men are also examples of how we are going to demean men, make them seem irrelevant at best, but horrible beasts at worst. Men are violent. Men aren't gentle. Men are stupid. Men can't multitask. Men just want to drink beer. They just want to leave their wives and chase their secretaries. All of these stereotypes about men, I believe, very strong in our society today. There is very little appetite on the part of anybody to challenge this orgy of negative stereotyping of men. I believe it's because it's a part of the backlash to keep men from claiming their rights to be treated as equals in the female domain. Very much like all of the stereotypes about women who weren't logical, cried too much, just wanted to file their nails and go shopping. They were catty, they were conniving. All of those stereotypes about women served to keep women out of the male domain of business and science and government. I think it's part of a backlash. That's, in a word, I think that this is all part of a backlash to keep men from moving forward and doing that reinvention that I referred to. That I think there is a significant reason to believe that women look at men and in a begrudging way see that we do a lot of good things and we have an interesting way about ourselves. And oh my God, we don't want them in our territory because they might show that they're as good as we are at this raising kids thing. They might even be better. They might even have more of what we currently need. They got that vitamin M that we've been sort of hiding and throwing out with the trash. They're going to bring a lot of that. Ooh, they're going to be really important and good. Can't let that happen because we're the mothers. I'm the mother. It's sort of the idea that women are like a half a step below the angels and men are just sort of a half a step above the animals. I mean, even the idea that you hear frequently that women create life is wrong. Women do not create life. An egg without a sperm is very much like a sperm without an egg. Neither amounts to much. And it is the union of the sperm and the egg that sparks life. Once the sperm and the egg unite, we have a zygote. And once the zygote exists, it takes over its own creation of life. And I don't mean to demean the beauty and wonder of giving birth, but what women have is a blood-rich muscle called the uterus. And the zygote is the one that sends out its placenta to find a supply of nutrition in that blood-rich lining of the uterus. And so if you think about the zygote as being its own agency, men create life as much as women do. And we sort of have to assert that. We are valuable. There is a reason that nature decided that it wanted two sexes. And, if you think about the value of diversity, the most fundamental diversity of all, and I'm talking now about viewpoint diversity, not just about demographic diversity, so you can check something on a checklist. We have two eyes so that together we can sort of get a better picture of how far away something is. The number 2 is the very first stop on the way to multiplicity of viewpoints. But when you get to multiplicity of viewpoints and you have 1 million different people on a committee, the complexities of that arrangement are impossible, and that committee's not going to get anything done. But having 2, sex A and sex 1, call them male and female, having 2, just 2, not 3, not 5, is the very best way. I think it's the very best way, the optimal way to avoid exclusivity and monovision with the least addition of complexity in that decision-making system. You got 2 people looking at things from different points of view, but it's a very simple system so that they can reconcile relatively easily, synthesize their different points of view into what they hope is the best possible understanding of what reality is. So dismissing men from that essential system, is calling it ridiculous wrong? It's a big mistake to ignore the value of men that we have to offer, that I think we could contribute to this reinvention of ourselves, to do things that we are not currently doing. And I should mention that I'm not talking here about all men immediately leaving their jobs and going home to be full-time homemakers. No, it's a complete spectrum, and you find men and women who match up to create a whole system on that spectrum. And I think it would result in a lot of unhappy men finding more happiness, a lot of unhappy women finding more happiness, a lot of unhappy kids being raised more happily.
That's a great perspective. I would love to end things on a little recap of the fact that you started your radio program 1983 and you started talking about men's issues. And from what I heard you say, there were a lot of men who were divorced, who were frustrated about that situation. And there were some other issues that really stuck out at the time. 40 years later, how's the conversation shifted? How have things evolved? What are some of the conversations you're having most of the time now with men?
There is still a lot of unhappiness among men. I think there is also a lot of surrender among men who have just given up in one way or another. Some men give up and just drop out of the workforce, say, what the hell, why should I even work? Nobody cares about me. Nobody loves me. I'm not really contributing. Other men drop out of the discussion of gender roles because they completely agree with everything feminism says. And if you don't, you're a bad man. There's a joke among men's issues people. It's a headline in the newspaper. Asteroid to hit Earth tomorrow. Human life will be wiped out. Subheadline, women hardest hit. Just sort of fed up with everything being looked at first and primarily from the woman's point of view and what's good for women. And a lot of men, and we should talk about boys also, a lot of men, because I think it's different for boys, a lot of men are at the point where they're saying, you keep talking about gender equality, but this is just not gender equality. You want to erase every vestige of sexism against women, and you leave mountains and mountains of sexism against men. When is this going to change? And I think a lot of those kinds of men think it's never going to change. Where's our leadership? Where is anybody willing to stand up and say, we need to pay better attention to men, and I'm willing to lose women's votes in pursuit of it? What's happening with boys? Well, I think boys, many boys, sort of feel like they're on a team with really, really stupid coaches, really pathetic mentors who really don't know how to play the game that they're supposedly coaching the boys to play. And team spirit on their team is really bad. And they don't want to play the game that the coach is trying to get them to play because they don't respect the coaches. And so they sit in their parents' basements and they're playing video games because that's fun and at least the rules are fair. And I get respect sometimes. And the rules don't change on me all the time. And I'm not told how bad I am in this game. I have a chance to be told how good I am. And they hear about how there's this thing called male privilege. And they were born in 2010, and they're saying, what? I have to take a back seat because of my male privilege? What are you talking about? Where? What? I have to be taught to respect girls? Don't girls need to be taught to respect boys? I mean, Sally over there just yesterday wore a T-shirt to work that said, girls rule, boys drool. That's okay? We really need to muster the confidence and the courage, primarily the confidence, to say as nice a way as possible, which is going to be perceived by a lot of people as not nice at all, but to say, look, you're not going to like this. But in the interest of getting as much input as you can to the decisions we need to make as a society, you need to listen to this. I know you might call me a misogynist. I know you might call me a loser, an incel, a wimp. Fine. I know you have lots of defenses that you are ready to deploy against me. But just listen for a minute or two. Just listening doesn't mean you agree with me, but just listen. Because we live in a time when listening to everybody's point of view is a cherished value. And treating everyone as a stakeholder to the extent that they are impacted by the decisions we're about to make really is an important thing to do. Shouldn't we be doing the same thing for men? I mean, maybe there really is a reason that men exist. Maybe men really do have something to contribute. Maybe we should trust them a little more. And maybe we should distrust all of the rancor that we hear about male oppression of women. Can we do that? That's what it's going to take. When millions of men are doing that, and millions of good women who understand are doing that, that's when we'll be able to make some really positive changes.
Jack, thank you so much for bringing your perspective to this conversation today. It was a good one and got really deep into some of the historical stuff and also just a lot of the issues that are going on with men today. So thank you for bringing that. Thank you again for being here and bringing value to everyone who's listening right now. And hopefully if they have a perspective that they would like to share, we'll hear about it in the comments. Thank you for being here and hanging with me till the end. I want to encourage you to try one tiny act of joyful rebellion this week. And that is to say no to one thing that drains you, just one. Then use that space for something wildly ordinary that makes you feel alive. And that's how it starts. Small moves can lead to big destinations. Tell me what you try. I'd love to hear, and I'll be right here next week when you're ready for more.